Hello, everyone. Welcome to another fantastic episode of the Tank Talk podcast, the largest podcast in the world. Everybody knows it. Everybody has embraced it as such. You know, it's hard being this successful, Jason, but it's the life we chose. So we are here today with an extremely special episode. I'm happy about this episode for a lot of reasons, but we, again, are trying to expand. You know what? I'm not even going to say it. You say it, Jason, because it's your episode anyway. What are we doing today?
Well, what we're doing today is we have a special guest. Rick Borstein is going to be with us today. And if you've never heard of Rick Borstein, you should, and you will now. And what John and I have been trying to do over, especially the last few months, is really enhance what we're doing here with the Tank Talk podcast and bring on guests that have a lot to offer. And for me personally, when I think of people who have had a major influence in the hobby, Rick Borstein is one of those people. I've often said on the live streams on Primetime Aquatics, there are times when I shut my mouth and I open my ears and I just listen. And a lot of times that's what the clubs that I belong to, and in particular, when Rick Borstein was part of the Greater Chicago Cichlid Association, he's one of those people when he's talking, it's time to be quiet and just listen. And so today, hopefully all of you are going to get to experience that as well. It's going to be a great time.
Well, and I am going to do exactly what you just said, Jason. I am going to sit back and I'm going to handle the production behind the scenes stuff. And I'm just going to listen to what you two fantastic gentlemen have to talk about. So I don't want to delay things anymore. Let's just get right into it. Let's get my ugly mug off of the camera and let's bring Rick in.
Rick, thank you so much for being here. I know you are a busy person, and I thought it would be awesome just to spend a little time sharing your experience. Well, you've kept so many different types of fish, and it actually is mind-boggling. I've been to your fish room a number of times. It's one of the cleanest, most well-organized fish rooms, at least when you had it in Illinois, that I've ever seen in my life. And by the way, for those of you who want to see what is now his old fish room, check out the description below. I will try to link a couple of those fish room tours for you because they are very impressive. So, Rick, if you could just spend a couple minutes, tell us, how did you become you in the fish keeping hobby? Like, where did it all start? How did it evolve over time?
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. It's a pleasure. And I know Jason, I know you from the Greater Chicago Cichlid Association, all the swap meets, and you're always a friendly face, and I appreciate that. So I think my journey started like a lot of Acris journey. You know, we had a fish tank. I had a fish tank as a kid. And until I moved recently, I still had the first 5-gallon tank I ever bought. And so, like a lot of little kids, I would get on my bike and pedal down to different pet stores and take a look at them. I remember seeing big red swordtails bred in Florida and discus and, you know, all sorts of fish. And I just, checked out books out of the library by Axelrod and all the other favorite older authors, and just really got into it. And then, college happened and I got married, had kids, and didn't get back into it until a little bit later. And then I really caught the bug when I went into a pet store and in Buffalo Grove, Illinois, Tropical World, no longer there, and met with Scott Robbins, who, was a very knowledgeable person, but also a member of, back then, the Suburban Acris Club in Chicago. And I joined that club, and later the Greater Chicago Cichlid Association. And then I started a library club in Chicago called the Chicago Library Society, which is still going on with my friend Bob Sternfield is running it now. And then most recently, about 3 or 4 months ago, I moved down to Florida. I retired, and I've been a member of the local Fort Myers Aquarium Society down here, and just built a website for them and helping them out and auctioning and all the fun stuff. So that's kind of the shortened version of it, but there's a lot of trips along the way.
That is awesome. And you mentioned, again, the diversity of interest that you have in fish, everywhere from live bears into cichlids, and I'm sure we will touch on all of them. I actually wanted to start with the live bears because when I was at your fish room, there were some things that really stood out. And again, for those of you, check out the tour. It's awesome. But it was kind of cool because you had like 2 parts of your fish room. You had like a lot of the cichlids, whether they were African cichlids, West African, Great Lakes, some of the South and Central Americans. And then you had a whole other area there were a lot of live bears there. And so what would you say to somebody who is into fish keeping are some of the most interesting live bearers that you've kept, and why do you think they're interesting?
Oh, wow, that's a broad question. So, to me, my interest in live bearers really arose out of my interest in helping maintain them. A lot of our live bearers come from Mexico and Central America, and many are in really critically endangered in the wild. And I really got into live bearers after going to an ALA convention. I'm not sure how I got there. I don't remember. But I went there and I heard Dr. John Lyons speak from the University of Wisconsin. And he's been very active in the North American Goodayad Working Group. Goodayas are a type of live bearer. And, he charts, how they're doing. And they're doing worse and worse and worse because of, habitat destruction, water diversion, pollution, etc. And a lot of the countries in Central America, their number one priority is not, looking after a little tiny ditch fish. They are trying to, make sure there's water for irrigation, and so on. So really with live bearers, I got into them because I was really interested in enhancing their conservation status. Because when we keep these fish in our tanks and we breed them and we pass them on, we're helping ensure their survival. And there's a number of live bearers like Ameca splendens and others where there's far more in tanks than in the wild these days. But I think what you asked, Jason, was what live bearers I like. So I like a lot of them. I think they're all very interesting. There's different types of live bearers, but the two ones I was mostly interested in were the poecilids and the Goodayas. And that the poecilids would be like the guppies, things that have a gonopodium, which is the male sex organ. And the Goodayas, sometimes called the split fins, the males have a little notch on the fin, which performs the same function. The Goodayas are from the highlands of Mexico. Many of them, perhaps the bulk of them, are threatened or endangered. And what's kind of cool about them is they're not like guppies. They don't just breed all the time. They're like cichlids. Many of them have mating behaviors like cichlids. A lot of them behave like cichlids. And many of them are territorial too. And they're not all easy to breed, so they're a challenge. Some of them need very specific water parameters, either temperature or chemistry or both. So some of my favorites there, probably the fish I'm most proud to have bred is Alodontictes zonistius, which is a very pretty Goodayad. And for the longest time, I was the only one in the United States of them. When I moved my fish around, I passed a lot of them on to fairly, well-known live bearer hobbyists, and hopefully they are reproducing them. I also like the bulldog Goodayad, which is, the largest Goodayad. They get up to a foot long, and I just think it's crazy that a guppy could be a foot long, and they eat them in Mexico. But I bred those very successfully for quite a few years and passed those on as well. I like swordtails and things like that too, and there's a lot of very interesting wild type swordtails. My favorite swordtail is probably Zophophorus mayi, the Mayan swordtail. They get, about 7-8 inches overall, and they're huge and colorful. And when I was keeping them, even my cichlid friends, Jason, would come down to my, fish room and say, "Oh, those are really cool." And cichlid people are snobs, as you know. Not bad snobs, good snobs, because I'm one of those too. I bred 280 plus species of cichlids too.
So, wow, 280 species of cichlids. All right, so if you had to just put a number on it, how many different fish species do you think you've bred over the years?
Oh, probably like 350, 375, something like that.
Wow. It's funny because there's in the YouTube community and on social media, there is always this debate about what does it mean when you say somebody is a master breeder? And that's like some just tag that people just randomly get. I want to talk more about the Goodayas in a second, but I wanted to establish this as well. You are in the GCCA, you are what is considered to be a master breeder. What does that mean in terms of that title?
Well, in the GCCA, the title of Master Breeder is given to someone who has submitted 100 spawns, individual species or locations of fish. So you could have, Pseudotropheus dileptos or something, could be one of them, or who knows, any cichlid that you can breed. So I've bred about 286 something like that in the GCCA. I have a list of them somewhere. But a lot of this is, remember, I didn't do it all in one year. I've been in this hobby for 25 years. You I think my best year ever, I might have bred 22, 25 spawns of fish,
And in that time, what you do is being part of the GCCA, when you breed them, it's a very well documented procedure. It's not just you showing up and
Right,
being like, "Oh yeah, I bred these 5 this week." You have to bring in the fry, and people have to okay the fact that okay, you brought in the fry, they're the right
right.
size, it is a species,
Mhm.
and then you get credit for that. So it's a well documented process. It's not just a bunch of guys sitting around being like, "Oh yeah, I'll give you credit for those 10 if you said you did it."
Exactly. I mean, you have to turn in the fry. People visit your fish room, they know what you're doing. There's very little that I've seen over historically people cheating in it. The reason we do it is people like me, I'm a goal oriented person. And I remember when I joined GCCA, this is 1999 and I'm old, right? So it was a long time ago. And I thought, oh, these cichlids are interesting. I'll go breed rock cribs, which is a Victorian cichlid. And I bred those and I got to 10 and I thought, oh, this is cool. I got to 10. Now I'm a beginner breeder. I get a plaque for that. And I thought, what if I could get to 25? And that was the next step. And so I bred those and I thought, you know what? I could get to Master Breeder. And so I made it my mission to do that. And at the same time, Jason, this predates your joining GCCA. There was a lot of other, I'll call them colleagues at the time. We were about the same levels and we were competing with each other, and competition can be fun. I keep fish too. I keep, a lot of some species for the long term. But when you're breeding fish really actively after a goal, what you're doing is breeding them, passing the fry on and the adults on to someone else who can enjoy them. And I think one of the good things about having a Breeders Award program in a club is that it brings fish into the club. And, through podcasts like you guys, there's lots of good information on the web now, and you can buy fish online, but I think it's still not, the same as going to a club or visiting a fish room and saying, oh, that's the cool fish. You learn so much by visiting someone in person and, buying fish from other hobbyists. And Jason, you breed fish, you sell fish, and you're able to pass all that knowledge on. And it is great to be able to find locally raised fish from a trusted aquarist who you understand the provenance of the fish, and the fish is going to be what it's supposed to be. I think I'm rambling here, but
No,
the idea
that's
of a BAP, a Breeders' Award program, is really, really the core of the club because it circulates fish in the club. That's why we're there. We're there to learn, and we're there to get fish and to share our excitement about and our passion for these animals.
all right. So you had mentioned the Goodeids. I want to go back to that because I think it is such an important thing. You had mentioned that that's one of the reasons why you got into live bears. So many of these fish are endangered. Can we start with what specifically is, you mentioned that they're mostly located in Central America, Mexico, but what's specifically harming their environment?
Oh, well, there's a lot of factors. First of all, pollution is a big factor. For example, um, I heard from Dr. John Lyons about a sugar plantation that would put all its wastewater in a river and poisoned it for several miles downstream. Water is getting diverted for agricultural use. They're emptying creeks and pumping water into fields to grow crops. That's the other big one. A third is introduced non-native species. So Mexico has introduced black bass, largemouth bass, into different waters, and they did that Lake Zacapu, for example, and basically killed all the gonnaids in the lake. There's still a few outside the lake in little creeks and stuff, but when you introduce a large predator like that, where none was present before, these fish really have no way of responding. So those are three reasons. There are probably more. Um, and I think also just a lack of appreciation for them. Mexico is, not the wealthiest country, and they have higher priority things to do, like feed their people, than worry about little fish. So that's why we need to keep them.
Now, if someone were interested in keeping the Goodeids, because you did mention water parameters, and I have kept a few, not nearly as many as you have, maybe 4 or 5 different species, but a lot of them do require maybe different water parameters than what we're used to seeing in tropical fish. What would you say if someone were like, hey, you know what, I'm on board, I want to keep these fish, I want to make sure that they're still in this world? What advice would you give to the new Goodeid fish keeper?
Well, the water parameters aren't too tricky for some species. I mean, generally, neutral to hard water is fine, but for a lot of the species, you cannot keep them warm. So if you only have one fish room and you're heating your fish room to like 78 degrees, it's way too warm for these Goodeids. They come from 3,000 feet up in the mountains, in cool temperatures, like up to maybe about 70, 72. And so you need to keep many of them cooler. And in the wintertime, because they're many are seasonal breeders, you want to cool them down, to maybe in the 60s, like in a basement in Chicago, where you're from, but I'm not anymore. Yeah, I'm in Florida now. Like, keeping your tanks cool here is a major problem. There are no basements here. So folks who want to do it in Florida need to cool the water, which is something I've never had to face before. I've got a plan when I build my fish room, but that's another discussion. But let's keep them cool as part of the problem. Some of them cannot. There's a few that literally won't survive over 70 or 72. But if you do have a fish room, you are looking to keep a couple Decodes, and you can only keep it warm. Here's a couple that you can keep. You can keep a Mecha splendens, which is the butterfly Decode. It's a very pretty fish with speckles inside. Males have a bright yellow tail. You can also keep the red tail Decodes, any in the Xenotoca eiseni complex. That would include Xenotoca doadrioi and the others like that. There's several there. You can pick those up at club auctions. You see them here or there. Those are fish that can take it warm. You can even put them in a pond in the summertime, and when it's hot, and they'll do just fine. And they're very pretty fish that can get, the doadrioi in particular is really a spectacular looking fish when you get a very bright male. And you don't need a huge tank for them. 20 long is a good sized tank to have a good colony of Decodes. You can probably have 30, 40 fish in there, and they'll just keep going.
And generally speaking, at least for the ones that you've mentioned, they're not overly aggressive then if you're keeping them in a 20 long?
Well, no, with each other, they're fine in groups. The thing about some of the Decodes, surprisingly, is like these Xenotoca complex, the doadrois, the eisenis, they're kind of nippy. Like, if you keep them with cichlids, they'll go after your cichlids.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
They do pretty well with Central American cichlids, and you can keep them together. And I think Rusty Wessel. He does a great talk about keeping cichlids and live bears together. So if you like wild type swordtails, they can handle it warmer. They like it cooler, but 75, 76 is no problem. You can keep those with your West African cichlids or Central American cichlids.
I've done Amica splendens. I've had the doadrioi. I had them. It was a bycatch from an import that I got, and they live forever. And I have that problem that you're talking about, where my fish room is, the air temperature is 80 to 82. So the tanks are all cooking at 80, 77, 78. The one that really burnt out, and I had Iliodon wide-eye, and that one seemed to do okay for a while. The one that was so disappointing, and it's my favorite, is the Scyphia multipunctata.
Yeah.
And I had the first time I ever got those fish, I got a pair. And it was back when they really hadn't made their rounds yet. I paid big money for those fish, like $150. And it was one of those stories where I literally lost the male the next day. And I had this ugly female that lived for, I don't know how long, probably a year. And then John Hornig from Greenwater gave me like a dozen of them, and I threw them in a tank that I thought would be cooler, and I lost. They just all burnt out. Are those one that you would recommend keeping those cooler as well?
Yeah, so I kept those. So you mentioned my two fish rooms. So one I kept at about 77, 78. The other one I kept around 70 to 68 to 70 degrees. I had a tropical fish room and a temperate fish room. Most of the Decodes like it on the cooler side, which is cheaper. You don't have to heat the tank, which is great. And Scyphia multipunctata is one of them that would like it 70 degrees to 72 or cooler. And the key with many of these Decodes, these fish, when you go to collect them in the wild, and they exist in enormous flocks. They're in the plants, and there's hundreds of them in there. They don't like living as pairs. They really don't. They're social fish. They have a pecking order. You want to start with 6 to 8. A dozen is even better. And I had that same problem breeding some of the Scyphias in the beginning, and I would buy a pair and it wouldn't work. And then finally, I can't remember who it was, but he gave me like 15 in a bag, little guys, get them small. And then, they were like gangbusters. They want to be kept in large groups. And you can remember, they're little fish, you can keep them in large groups in a relatively modest tank. That's one of the cool things about live bearers, unless you get a Lophorus robustus, bulldog Decode I mentioned, those guys get, but I bred those in a 20 long too. In fact, I generally didn't keep live bears in any tank bigger than 20 long.
So here's a question. If you're keeping the live bears like the Scyphia and some of these other ones that really like the cooler waters, let's say you've got a 20 gallon, 20 long, 29 gallon, maybe even a 55. What what would you say would be good tank mates for these fish? Because if people are like, okay, well, I'm going to keep this fish, but I'd like to have other things to look at as well, keeping in mind, like you said, and I found it to be true as well. They're pretty darn rambunctious. They can be awfully active. So what are you keeping with these besides them if you wanted to have a mixed community?
That can be challenging. So for me, because I'm mainly interested in conservation, I mainly kept species tank. So what I would keep with them mostly was like bristlenose plecos, which I bred also. The challenge with some of the Gudeids is a lot of them, when they have their babies, they fall to the bottom. So if you keep Corydoras in there, they will eat them. Other people say that doesn't happen, but that happened to me. So I'm just relaying my personal experience. So you can keep like swordtails and Gudeids together if you want to. I prefer to keep species tanks. I just like what I have there. But you could probably keep other fish with them. If you want to, you can keep some cichlids with your Gudeids or swordtails. You might, if you have enough plants at the surface, like swordtail babies tend to go up. So you'll get some even if there's cichlids in the tank. And so you could have basically what is like a habitat tank if you wanted to. I didn't keep them that way because I was mainly interested in reproducing them and making sure I could maintain their numbers for conservation purposes.
And I think that
I
is
hope
the
that
way
doesn't
to
make
keep
me
them.
criminal.
Yeah.
That's just how I did it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's you obviously you did it the right way. And that's because we go back to the core purpose of keeping, especially the Gudeids, and that is to maintain them and try to maintain their lines. Have you heard of or seen any documentation of people actually returning tank raised Gudeids back to their original habitat to restore their populations?
Yeah, actually, interestingly, it's been done, I believe, twice now. So when I went to Mexico in 2014, I visited the Aqua Lab at the University de Michoacan. And what they've been doing down there is taking some Gudeids. The first one they did was Zoogoneticus tequila, the tequila live bearer, which is not named for tequila the liquor, but for the Tequila Mountains. It's a very pretty fish. And they put them in ponds and got them in large numbers and then reintroduced them successfully to the wild. And I believe they might have done another fish since then. I think it might be Zoogoneticus parepicus, but don't quote me on that one. It can be done. Interestingly, from everything I've read, reintroductions seldom work, but apparently they got it working. So they took the watershed, which had been invaded by non-native species. I think they poisoned it and they reintroduced the right species there, including the fish, and got it to work. So good on them. Ameca splendens is an example. It's found only in 1 or 2 locations in Mexico today. One is a pool in a hotel.
Wow.
So,
that's not going to cut it.
Yeah. So, but fortunately, Ameca, we have way more in the hobby than probably exists in the wild. They're easy to breed, and people like them and maintain them because they're just happy little fish that are pretty.
Yeah. And for those of you, again, who are watching this, listening to it, if you're interested, again, I've done the fish room tour of Rick Borstein, but I also did a fish room tour of someone who was in the club with you, and that was Andrew Pierkowski. And his entire fish room was pretty much Gudeids and a few other random live bears. So I'll try to put that in the description as well. If you want to see what these fish look like, they are very interesting. On that note, I guess one of the things that people will say when they start researching these fish is, well, a lot of them are green, brown, tan, right?
Yeah.
If you were to pick the 3 most attractive, and maybe this overlaps with what you've already said, but the 3 most attractive Gudeids where people be like, okay, these are really going to stand out in my aquarium, which ones would you pick?
Okay. So just remember, I didn't keep fish because they are pretty. I kept fish for their conservation reasons. But that said, some of them are really pretty. The one we talked about already is Xenotoca doadrioi. Is a really pretty fish. The males are gold and red and yellow and blue, and they're really pretty, and they have red tails. That's a good one. Ameca splendens can be very pretty with the metallic on the side, the spots, and the yellow tail. Zoogoneticus tequila, the tequila live bear, I think is a really nice one. It looks a little bit like the Ameca. And some of the swordtails are just not a Goodea, but a lot of the native swordtails are spectacular looking. They have a lot of color on them, and they get bigger than domestic varieties.
So
I mean, my favorite is, and I think the prettiest is Alodontictes zonistius, but it is a fish that's almost impossible to find.
Mhm.
You know, I imported fish from Europe, and as part of my club, and I worked for them and got them going, and they didn't have a lot of babies, like 12. So, and they're tricky and they're kind of aggressive, but it's a very pretty fish with the markings.
I've always
But
loved the.
if you're looking for, you know, like if you're looking for big, brightly colored fish, I mean, most of the Gadaeids are not going to be that for you. Some are very interesting looking. Some are kind of bright, you know, bright, shiny green with black tails. You'll find a lot of color in them that doesn't show well in photographs, but under tank lights can be pretty charming. A lot of them are very metallic and have an iridescence to them.
I've always loved the Scyphia multipunctata because the males with that yellow and black is just, oh my gosh, those things are
Yeah,
outstanding.
I should have mentioned those. I forgot
Yeah.
those. Those are very, very pretty. The thing with the Scyphia multipunctata, depending on the location, they can look wildly different. And when
Yeah.
I went to the Aqualab in Mexico, you see that same species all the way from just straight tan males to males that are almost solid black,
Hmm.
with every combination between black and tan, yellow, black, and tan. Some even have a little orange on them. They can be really good looking fish. And so that would be one that I'd recommend. Again, you want to keep that one cooler.
Yeah.
So that might not be the very first beginner fish. And like I said before, get a bunch of them, get 8 or 10 of them to start, and get some floating plants and you'll be successful. They're not demanding fish to keep. You can feed them on flake food and they're just fine.
So funny story about the Doadrio. I mentioned they were in a bycatch and I had them in a 20-gallon quarantine tank and I needed that tank, but I didn't take those fish out. There was probably half a dozen in there. And at that point, they were already about 6 months old. I threw in a bunch of Acthrictes heckelii, the albinos, and they were pretty decent size. Just I needed the quarantine tank. I was quarantining them for a swap. Those Gadaeids destroyed those cichlids. I mean, all of a sudden I'm looking at the fish. I'm like, holy cow, where are their tail fins? And I had to get them out of there. I mean, you mentioned that some of them can be a little bit nippy and you wouldn't expect it from, live bears, you think guppies, endlers, they're so splatties, they're so sweet. Those guys, man, they put a whooping on probably like 35 heckelii. And I was like, nice job. Out you go. So
Yeah, the red-tailed ones all of them are pretty nippy. That is a fish that will hold its own. I mean, they live with Central American places where there are cichlids. So they know what to do. And they're all micro predators. They have little teeth, you know, up at front, and they can be nippy, and they eat filamentous algae and insects and all sorts of stuff, and they need those teeth. So, but they're not all like that. There's a few Gadaeids that are predatory. The one that I found very interesting, I kept for a long time and produced a lot of fry from, was Alophris robustus. That's the bulldog Gadaeid, the really large Gadaeid I talked about. And I just got a kick out of having a guppy that was approaching 7-8 inches and thick like a hot dog.
that's so messed up. Like I've
It's
never
messed
seen the
up, but
fish.
it's so fun.
Yeah,
And
it's just out of a horror
they
movie.
didn't have much color, but I remember I brought them home, and some of your viewers may not like this part, but I got them. I'd been looking for them for a long time, and I believe Patrick Miller, who was the president of the ALA at the time, he came to speak to our club, and he brought some, and we put them in our meeting auction. I had to have them. I did not have any tank space. I had a tank with some endlers in it, which was heavily planted, and I thought, and these bulldog days were little. They were maybe 1.25 inches long. And I thought, okay, I'll put them in here for now until I can move them. And then about a month later, there weren't any endlers left, and they tripled in size. These bulldog Gadaeids are predatory, and they grew really good. I mean, I didn't intend that to happen, but sometimes nature takes its course. But in reality, you can feed them just fine on flake when they're young and cichlid pellets when they're bigger. And they're ambush predators. They're inelegant predators, to say the least.
So I think it'd be safe to say that these are not shrimp safe fish.
I wouldn't say maybe an Endler's livebearer would be a shrimp safe fish, but none of these other ones would be shrimp safe. They'll eat, they're opportunistic fish, all of them.
So I thought you would be a really interesting person to have on for two reasons about the live bearers. Thinking about guppies.
Okay.
Now, I have maintained for a long time, I could not keep guppies alive. I would go to the store, I would buy guppies, I would bring them home. I could go to a wholesaler, get guppies, bring them home, and and they would look good. And then within 3 weeks, they would all be dead. Keeping in mind, I've got hard water. I've got Chicago water, right? Do you have any insight as to why so many of the store-bought guppies, they're just a disaster? Where if you go to like the Chicago Library Society, I got guppies from that club, and oh my gosh, they were bulletproof.
I think a lot of the fish in the trade just are sick, and they're kept with antibiotics and stuff like that. They get to your tank, they get exposed to a new biome, and they just break down. I think they all need to be treated right away with like triple sulfa. Um, I mean, I've kept fancy guppies. I always had them in my fish room just because, and I kept them on the warm side because they appreciate it warm. But the guppies I got from other live bear hobbyists were all great. I never had a problem with them, like you mentioned. I'm not a person that usually goes to pet stores and buys fish unless it's a very special pet store, and there's a few of them. But I want to buy a fish, at least where I am in my hobby now. I want to buy a fish from someone I know and trust that's maybe a little unique and special. So when I spoke at the Akron Aquarium Society, I speak all over, by the way. One of their events, someone gave me some Stan Schubel Blue Delta guppies. Stan Schubel was a famous guppy hobbyist, bred this, and they're absolutely bulletproof guppies and really easy to maintain. Or I would buy, guppies from Bob Sternfield, who's the president of the Chicago Live Bear Association now. And that's kind of real value for all your folks listening out there. Join a local fish club if you can. Don't be afraid to get out. And like if you're, I think sometimes we hide behind our screens, and we think we can learn everything from the internet. But when you go out and talk to real people, and I do all the YouTube stuff. Believe me, I'm addicted to TikTok. I'm going to be really upset when they are shut down here shortly. But go out to your local fish clubs, and there you will meet real people who have bred fish for years, like me or Jason, and you will learn so much. I think there's so much information in the village. Go out and join a local fish club. They're easy to find online, and just show up for a meeting, and it'll be fine. I promise.
And fish people are some of the nicest people you will ever meet. I mean, I've always felt welcome, whether it was a GCCA, Chicago Live Bear Society, Greenwater. It's like you walk in there and it's like, hey, wait, you're a fish nerd like us? You're in our small little club here. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm rooting, when I'm in these clubs, I'm rooting for everybody to have a great time and to enjoy what they're doing. And so I can share what I know. I will share anything I know with anybody. Like nothing is proprietary. And I think one of the best things we can do is get out there and work with other hobbies, because we are the hobby. And so that's what, getting back to the Breeders' Award program you talked about, that's a way that you can give to the hobby and have fun at the same time. You're passing on the fish for other people. If you sell quality fish like you do, Jason, and you tell people about them and you pass on that information, that's also helping the hobby. And, I think sometimes there's some really good pet stores out there, but, some of these big chains, don't have, in many cases, really well-educated staff. And so I don't want to throw them under the bus. That's not my jam. But go find people who have bred hundreds of species of fish who can help you. And when you make friends like that, you can call them up. I don't know if you ever had Mike Helwig on your broadcast, but when I'm having trouble, so I can call my friend Mike, who's bred probably 500 species of fish, and he usually has an answer.
Yep. So here's one of the most common misconceptions, and I must admit, I think I had this as well for quite some time. I want to turn our attention to mollies. And what I always thought is that, again, this was another fish. I'd buy it from the pet store. They would do what I like to call the death wobble, right? Where their fins are clamped up and they kind of shake back and forth. And I just assumed they need a decent amount of salt. And then, I actually did a species profile about mollies, black mollies. I actually got from the Chicago Live Bear Society, not a hint of salt in my water. And they thrived and had a bazillion babies. And every molly I ever got from the Chicago Live Bear Society was absolutely like some of the strongest fish I've ever gotten, and no salt. And so what is your opinion on whether or not mollies need salt? They need salt to breed. They don't need it.
So the mollies, many of them are, you can find them in estuaries, which is a mix of fresh and salt water, and sometimes even in pure salt water, but they don't need salt. They can bioregulate in anything. They're found in freshwater and saltwater. And also there's a lot of really interesting fish in the molly family. There are poecilids. You can track down the Liberty Molly, which has red, white, and blue fins. Those are cool. I really like sailfin mollies. I was successful breeding those. Again, mollies are one of those, Jason, you need large groups of them to be successful. If you go out and collect them, what you'll see is 1 or 2 males and like 300 females or subdominant males. So like just all over the place. And I think the fact that we should not keep these as pairs, they don't like it. You might be able to get it to work with guppies and others that don't eat their babies. Mollies will eat their babies if they're stressed. A lot of live birds will. Get a big group of them. And if you can, get like 6 to 8 or 10 or 12 juveniles in a planted tank. And usually you don't need too much more than that. And you're going to be okay.
And I think one of them, you're absolutely right. That's when I had the best luck, is when I had large groups of them, and then they would just keep breeding and breeding like crazy, plenty of plants. And I think what people underappreciate is the sailfin mollies get huge, and those males are no joke. I actually had people ask me about this all the time. In a 33 long, I was able, all they had was a pair. I got a pair of sailfin mollies, and the male was gigantic. And people ask, "You're keeping mollies in your Lake Tanganyika tank? Aren't they getting destroyed?" I'm like, no, that male sailfin molly is running that tank.
Yeah, they are. Remember, so when they're out in the wild, the cost of having a giant sailfin where the birds can see them from above, you got to be tough to hang. You got to be tough to hang out. And when you see them in the wild, like you can go to, next time you go to Florida, go take a look. You can find mollies pretty much everywhere in ditches. They're Latipina in Florida mostly. They're not the Volifera, the really big sailfins, but you can find them. You go mini golfing, a lot of times they're on the golf course.
That's so cool.
Sanibel Island, when I used to go there with my kids in the Ding Darling Preserve, they're everywhere. And you can see them in these large groups. And like, I think we need to remember that, because there's a big male and he is fighting. That guy, for lack of better, he's got some balls, not literally, but he's out there trying to maintain all these females, and he's got to be tough, bro. You know.
So why do you think it is that when you look at the pet store mollies, they are so frail and they're prone to ick? They're a disaster.
I think, they're shipped a lot. Big mollies, in my opinion, do not ship well. So the best place to start is to get some smaller ones, juveniles from someone who bred them locally, if you can, or collect in the wild. That works good too. I just think they're kept with antibiotics and things. They break down when they get there, and shipping is stressful on fish. So if you go to a pet shop that has mollies, go to a really good pet store that quarantines their fish for a while before they put them on sale. And you can see them at wholesaler. They're good for a couple of days and they start to break down.
Yeah. And I wonder if part of that too is the fact that they might very well be breeding these things to enhance their breeding in brackish water. Because you look at overseas a lot. I mean, there's so many of these breeding operations are coastal anyway. So it's really easy just to pump in some salt water into their fresh water. Next thing you know, what they're doing is they're shipping fish that have always been in brackish water. And then they get to the wholesaler and the pet store and boom, here you go. Here's your fresh water. And I don't know your experience. Do they convert well if they've been bred and they develop in brackish water? Can they convert easily? And maybe it's just a matter of the stress.
I think the fish are highly adaptable to water, mollies in particular. And I'll tell a kind of a side story here. So I worked a lot with cave mollies, the sulforophylla. So Dr. Mickey Tobler found them in a cave in Mexico, and they'd probably been in there for 1,500, 2,000 years. And they evolved to have wider heads and smaller eyes, and they gulp air from the surface to live. And they live in this basically poisonous sulfur water. And there are some organisms that are sulfur-based that live there. They're eating all that stuff. And they're weird looking. They don't have much color. But what he found is they adapt perfectly well to fresh water from this water that was basically poison. The fish, I think, are adaptable. I think what happens during transit, maybe how they're kept in ponds, they're netted out roughly. Maybe they're being fed live food and they're not getting fed throughout the chain of custody of the fish. If I don't import fish myself, I know you do a little bit of that, Jason. Like some of these probably need to be treated with more antibiotics and gradually weaned off them. I think, and the guppy people know how to do that. But for me, I was mostly when I'm getting fish, I'm getting them from other aquarists. That's my preferred way to do it.
Right.
And I know not everyone has access to that, but like I said, join a fish club and suddenly the faucets will open.
Yeah.
They're
And
everywhere.
I hear you. I always had the best luck in the world. I tell stories all the time, whether it was GCCA or Greenwater or Chicago Live Bear Society, when you get fish that have been bred by individuals and they're not bringing in a whole bunch of disease all the time and having to worry about that. They were born in an aquarium. They stayed in that aquarium their whole life. They get put in a bag and now they're in your aquarium. You save a whole lot of issues. I can only remember maybe once or twice where I got fish from a club and there wound up being a problem. It's extremely rare.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, I don't know why people are having so much trouble with the pet store fish, but I don't buy pet store fish, so I can't give you a lot of advice there. But I have seen when sometimes I would get fish donated to some of the clubs I ran um, from the fish farms, and they would ship them in a big, box, and they'd have hundreds of fish in there, and they're so starved for oxygen, their gills are burnt.
Yeah.
And so the folks who bring them back kind of treat them, and they're good for a while. Sometimes they just fade out. They never recover from that.
Yeah.
So I'm very careful when I ship fish, which I do from time to time, to make sure I ship them carefully.
Yeah. I'm convinced in the supply chain, the further down the supply chain you get, the bigger the issues become, because I import thousands and thousands of fish every 4 to 6 weeks. And it's actually believe it or not, it's really rare that I lose fish. It almost never happens unless shipment gets delayed or maybe like one bag had a problem, but it's rare. But then you go down to the wholesale level. And I think as the further you go down, the more opportunity there is for fish that have just, there was 1,000 fish in this tank. Now they're gone. Now there's a different 1,000, and just the transfer of disease. And by the time you get to the pet store, I honestly believe that is where the vast majority of the problems happen, especially for pet stores who are unwilling to quarantine or unwilling to isolate fish. I think that is the place where, especially all your external parasites, that's where they pop up. Because I don't have that issue with import. I've never had fish that I can remember come in on an import with ick. They might get it after they've been here a while, and that's extraordinarily rare. It almost, I could say 50% of the time, if you go to a big box store, I'm going to get ick with those fish. So I like the way you're doing it. I think it works out a lot better.
Yeah, I think also when you look at a pet store, that the ones that have central filtration, meaning the water circulates from all the tanks together, you're just sharing all the pathogens from tank to tank. And so
100%.
I have my fish room, I don't use central filtration. I use central air, but I don't use central filtration. I'm keeping things separate, and I'm quarantining them until I know they're well. Most of the time, though, when I get a fish, if I got a fish from you, Jason, or other people I know, I usually feel pretty good about it, and I don't always quarantine them. Now, that said, I usually keep species tanks, so I'm going to confine into that one tank anyways. I'm not putting in with other fish anyways, and I don't have any community tanks. I hadn't had any community tanks in years. But that doesn't mean that's wrong. I think keep fish in any way that makes you happy. It's just my jam was to kind of maintain them.
Yeah. So again, for those people who are interested in seeing what your fish room used to look like in Illinois, that video will be in the description. Where are you at? So you're in Fort Myers right now, and do you have a fish room? Do you have tanks? What's the plan? What's the goal here?
Funny. Well, I'm actually in Cape Coral, which is really close to Fort Myers.
Okay.
It's about 20 minutes from there. And so it's about 20 minutes for me to go to the Fort Myers Aquarium Society meetings, which are held at this beautiful place called the Imaginarium, the IMAG, which is a science museum. They have a fantastic place. And right now, getting permits down here to redo your house really takes a long time because of all the hurricane damage. So looks like I just got my permit, and we're actually living in the place my fish room is going to be. So I'm living in a 12.5 by 12.5 room in a garage, which is air and heated. And my other hobby is classic cars. So I bought a place with a 26 by 54 foot garage to put cars in. And I'm living in there. The rest of this house is being demoed. And so I think our permit came in. So eventually I will build a fish room that's probably smaller than the one you're going to talk about in the video there. But it'd be about 12 by 12. And I have one little tub of fish outside with just some convicts in it right now. Just to have fish so I don't feel so lonely.
Well, that's the advantage too of being that far south. I mean, if you wanted to put stuff outside and do the tub thing and breed live bears out there, it's game on. I mean, you've got weather for that
Oh yeah,
all
but
year
the problem,
round.
summer here, it's 105 degrees. It is hot. We're equidistant with Miami,
Yeah.
right across, almost directly, right across
Uh,
Alligator Alley. So it gets really, really hot here. And it's tropical. The rainy season, it rains an inch every day, like
right.
here part of Florida. So your ponds need to overflow and stuff. So I have to relearn some stuff. Also, because of the tropical climate, the water here has they put oh gosh, no, I can't remember it, chloramines in it.
Okay.
So it's hard to break those bonds. You need to use Prime or some other really good water conditioner to do it. So I'm relearning some things. If you're in Chicago with Lake Michigan water, you're blessed. That water is really, really stellar water for fish, and
Yeah. It's
so
very stable too.
it's very stable. And my well water in the northwest suburbs was pretty good here. I am on city water here, and I'm kind of learning about it. It seems like I'll be okay with it. I have kept some fish in it so far. So,
Nice.
but I plan to rebuild my fish room, and I'm hoping to document that at some point. I will never be the social media superstars that you guys are, but
Oh man,
I
I'll tell
will.
you
I
when
hope to,
you get that
now
fish
that
room, when you get it up and
I'm
running, let me know because that'll be a great. Joanne and I, our favorite place is Fort Myers, and so we
oh,
will go down there. We can spend some time in Fort Myers. I'll film your fish room again. When you get that up and running, it'll give us an excuse to get
well,
back down there.
and you can speak to our club down here because I'm the speaker chairman.
I would absolutely do that.
Oh, by the way, if you're interested in learning about the Fort Myers Aquarium Society, fmas.club is the
And
website.
I was going to ask you too, as we start to wrap this up, because I know it's been about an hour and I don't want to take a whole bunch more of your time. You did mention something really important. I want to highlight it for everybody. One of the reasons why I had you on the podcast is you do a lot of talks and presentations at clubs. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I know you've done a number of different, you've got the 60 tips in 60 minutes, which I absolutely love. What other talks do you have besides the 60 tips in 60 minutes?
I think I've got 5 or 6 talks total.
Okay.
So I have a build a fish room talk where I talk about building my last fish room. That's kind of fun. That's not the most exciting talk. I have a collecting in Mexico talk, which is live talk. The first talk I ever did, which is a cichlid talk, is called The Road to Master Breeder. So how do you get to 100 spawns? And I talk about tips and tricks for spawning cichlids. I have a live bearer reproduction strategies talk where we talk about here's the different ways you can raise live bearers and do them. And you mentioned my 60 tips talk, but I also have a 60 more tips talk, which is the follow
Yes.
on. And I
Yep.
recently redid the first one, so it's about 50% new. So I have two 60s tips talks. And I'll be speaking, if you're interested, I'll be speaking at the Keystone Clash this year, which is a
I
big
saw that.
thing. If you want
Congratulations.
thank you. If you want to, I will also be at the ACA convention in June in San Antonio, I think, right?
I might be down there too. So I'm hoping, I'm still trying to work that out, but there's a chance I might be down there. I might see you down there.
Yeah, and I spoke to our own club here. There's a Venice Club. I'm speaking at Aquarama in April, which is put on by the Gold Coast Aquarium Society. Chuck Davis is a guy I think you know. So I'm still getting around. I love doing fish talks. I love meeting people, and I always learn. From everybody I meet. And I think this is a hobby where there's a lot of good information on the internet, but there's a lot of good information in people's heads. So get out there, meet other hobbyists, and you'll learn a lot, and you'll get access to fish and knowledge you wouldn't have any other way.
So if somebody has got a club and they're interested in having you come out and talk, is there a way to contact you? Is there an email or something?
Yeah, you can email me at Borstein, Borstein, at yahoo.com. Just my last name at yahoo.com. You go ahead and email me if you have a question. You can find me on Facebook as well. If you want to
Okay.
send me a messenger, whatever works for you guys.
And
I've been doing a lot of Zoom talks lately. Clubs seem to like to do those. And, not every club can afford to bring in a speaker, so they'll do it by Zoom. And those are great too.
yeah, so
So,
for those of you out there who are interested in having Rick come and speak at your club, trust me, it's worth it. It's worth the travel expenses to have him live. And I have probably heard at least half of those talks that you've mentioned, and they were all outstanding. Now, here's the thing. We're at that hour, and we're going to, if you are willing, at some point, we're going to have you back on because we didn't get to talk about the cichlids, and that was a huge part of what you do. At some point here in the future, we got to get you back on for a Rick Borstein part 2. We got to talk cichlids because I know you've got a whole lot to say about that as well.
yeah, I love cichlids. I'm trying to increase their popularity here in Southwest Florida, and it seems like they're if you bring the fish out and you talk about them, sometimes people just gravitate to them. And that's the influence that you guys have and I have when you get out in front of fish clubs and talk about it. You can share your passion about certain types of fish with others, and I'm getting to book all sorts of speakers and bring in experts on corridores and bettas and everything and get to learn it all. It's all interesting, and fish are amazing animals and fun to work with. And, I'm very grateful for the opportunity I've had in this hobby and, with folks like you, it makes it fun. And I have a lot of friends in the fish hobby, and I continue to invest in it. And I can't wait to have a fish room again.
Yeah. And the other thing too, for those of you who are in Southern Florida, especially Fort Myers area, I've been there, and the fish stores there freshwater are seriously lacking. So if you're looking for high quality fish, join the fish clubs in your area, because good luck. I walked into a fish store. We'll wrap it up here, but I walked into a fish store in Fort Myers, and I am not kidding. It was like I was on a different planet. Joanna and I walk in. We were thinking about filming. There was a woman at the front counter asleep. There was a dude who had, this is in the middle of their business hours, has half his tanks, 50% water changing. He's got buckets, hoses, water all over the floor. And I walk in, I look at Joanna, I'm like, and the chick was like snoring, sleeping, like not just putting her head down. I'm like, okay, we're out. But yeah, join the clubs there, because you guys need it. And by the way, a pro tip for you. I don't know, you may have done this before. If you're in Fort Myers, because I know you're a fitness guy, Hammerhead's Gym. It's awesome. You got to check it out.
Well, thanks. Appreciate that.
Thank you. We really appreciate you being here. I don't want to take up any more of your time. Thank you so much for being here. Like I said, we'd love to get you on for a part 2 at some point in the future. Everybody, Rick Borstein at yahoo.com. That's the contact information if you want to have him come speak at your events. As always, we'll be back same time, same place next week. Really appreciate you being here. Have a great week.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks.